So good to be back here with you all. Thank you to the worship team. I'm excited for this morning. You know, I feel like the Lord just has given me this word in the last season, but specifically this morning, I feel like one of the things that keeps ringing true in my heart for this house, for you as individuals, for those of you that maybe you don't call this house home, but you come here, relatively regularly. I feel like God is going to set perspective straight. That's what I heard. I'm going to set some perspective straight. How many want some perspective change? The whole spiritual life that we're called to live is all about renewing how we think, renewing our mind for transformation. There's a metamorphosis that God is wanting to always be doing within you, but to do that, He has to get you to think different. Apple got it right a little bit, think different. There's something about learning to think different that creates room for transformation in your life. And God, I hope that week in and week out when you come on Sunday, that you're leaving thinking different. I know you have an incredible pastor, Pastor Brad Pitt and Pastor Jennifer Aniston. You have an incredible pastor. I always call them that because that's what they remind me of. Well, he doesn't really remind me of Brad Pitt, but she reminds me of Jennifer Aniston. But I'm just encouraging him because, but you have incredible pastors. They're amazing. And his real name is Daryl, for those of you that do not know. And so you've been deceived for the last however many years he's been leading the church. His real name is Daryl. And, sorry, I let the cat out of the bag, man. But no, we love them. They're amazing, and they have always been a great example of generosity, and they're just incredible. And you guys are just so blessed to have amazing pastors. And I just want to remind you of that because you can forget. You can get familiar, can't you? Can't you? Now, you guys got to engage with me here, okay? If you don't engage with me, I'm walking out that door. You got to engage with me. I want to hear you talk back. I want to hear you tell me I'm stupid. No, I don't want to hear you tell me I'm stupid, but hey, I want to hear you engage. Can we engage today? Can we have a fun conversation, a fun time? Yeah. I just want to introduce quickly. I brought a friend. I brought one of our team members at Kingdom Culture, part of our house. His name's Nick. He's a businessman, full-time businessman in the marketplace, reaching the world for Jesus, and he inspires me every day by his big biceps. And but no, he's an amazing individual. Him and his wife, Nancy, they have 2 kids, and he decided to come on his own dime on this trip and just hang out with me. I know it's a short trip. I don't usually do this. It's a one session sort of moment, with you guys. So I only have a little bit of time with you guys. But he's an amazing individual and incredible testimony. I'm just going to, ride on you a little bit right now. He was a self-made millionaire at a very early age, and then, became addicted to alcohol, lost everything, drugs, alcohol, lost everything, and he was reborn, so to speak. And now he's an incredible kingdom marketplace leader that's changing the world and building God's way, and he's a huge inspiration, and just love having him here, and he's part of our house, and he's just a huge blessing. But I feel like I do have a word for you, and I want to share a few things. For those of you that don't know my name is Shawn Gabie. I have an amazing wife named Michelle. We have 4 kids. 4 kids, if we can put them on the screen, my 4 awesome kids: Promise, Victory, Ezekiel, and Harvest, who we just turned 1. She's like a newborn there, but just turned 1 in July. Promise, Victory, Ezekiel, and Harvest, and I feel so blessed. 4 kids, 4 and no more. That is the hashtag. 4 and no more. I'm done. I don't have the same grace that the Sullivans do to have 10,000 kids, but you have like 5 or 6, right? 5. Okay, you're one up on me. There's always an accident child, though. So hey, I've been telling Michelle that there's always an accident child. But no, I think we're done. I don't know how people have the grace to do more than 4. How many have more than 4 kids in here? You are a champion. You deserve the world. How many have more than 4 kids? How many have more than 6? More than 6? Who are you? How many kids do you have? 7. See, that's the God number right there. You're only spiritual if you have 7. I just want to open this up with, we've been in an interesting season. I'm going to jump into this really quick. We've been in an interesting season in Ottawa. We're from Ottawa, nation's capital, best city in the world. Next to London, of course. Next to London, best city in the world, next to London. But we have the privilege of leading a great community of people. We've been in an interesting journey. For those of you that have been following with us over the years, we went from having a building, great facility, to losing our facility to a great big company called Costco, who tore down our facility in the end of 2015. And so we have learned the homeless life. In the last almost 2 years now, 19 months, we've learned what homeless is like as a congregation, as what we call a mobile church. We're setting up, tearing down. We've learned to lean into what I call our limitations in life. How many know sometimes what feels like a setback is just God setting you up for something great on the inside? Because the battle is never really on the outside as much as it is on the inside. It's about changing your thinking about what really is, not letting what is around you be dictating to you what you should be like on the inside. That's where the greatest war is always. It's on the inside. And so, we had the amazing privilege of losing our building, and we've been on an interesting journey. And, it's interesting because at some level, and it's funny because this has been really for us a 5-year journey where God had spoken to us in that journey that we were about to move into a season of great loss. How many have ever had a season of loss? Maybe you went bankrupt. You lost a loved one, a spouse maybe, to some sort of sickness. Maybe you lost a job that you really loved to have. Maybe you lost your house. Something great happened, something bad happened, you just had a loss. But how many know sometimes that those losses in life, if you can see God in them, become the greatest preparation for gain on the inside? And if you can learn to gain on the inside first, you will always gain on the outside later. And it's been a 5-year interesting journey. And so in this last 2 years specifically, we're saying, okay, God, we're going to use what we have to the best of our ability. We're going to steward it. And even though we're in the midst of losing, at times we felt like we kind of lost everything and restarted all over again. How many of you ever felt like they started all over again? They started over again, they started all over again, And it's like that's kind of been the journey. And in the process, when you go through loss and you go through things, you get humbled, right? How many know humility is a really important trait to have? And humility is not just prefacing everything that you say with, I don't want to sound prideful, brother, but this, because usually if you do that, you are prideful, and that's why you're prefacing everything you say with, I don't want to sound prideful, because in you, you sound prideful, and you probably are prideful, so you want everybody else to think that you aren't prideful, and you really are prideful, so don't ever preface what you say with, I don't want to sound prideful, because you probably are. Just say it, and let us decide if you're prideful or not. But when you go through stuff like this, sometimes you feel like you've been taken out by the legs and you're kind of walking around with a limp and it really humbles you. But true biblical humility is obedience to God in every season. When it doesn't make sense, when you don't like it, when everything is going contradictory to all the things that you thought were going to happen, that's when humility is born, because obedience is expected in seasons where you don't want to be obedient. And you don't want to give in. You give up instead of giving in. You give up once, you quit once, it becomes a habit. Michael Jordan said that. You quit once, it becomes a habit. We have a lot of quitters in the kingdom, don't we? We think the promised land is so awesome, and it is. It's so awesome. The promise that we have, the destination, the ideal, the dream, and it's incredible. We want to get there, but we don't often want to pay the price that comes in the process to get there. And in the process, we give up and we quit. And as a result of our quitting, that quitting affects the next generation, which affects the next generation. Just look at our divorce rate in the church. It affects every generation. After us, God wants to raise up people that are going to win in every situation. God wants to raise up people that aren't going to quit in any situation. One of my daughters, her name is Victory. And her name is Victory for a reason. And it's funny because I have the privilege of seeing the names of my children working themselves out into their everyday lives. All their names have something specific that I believe is tied to their destiny and their purpose. We named them with intention and purpose. And Victory, her name, it's funny because sometimes she's like a perfectionist. If she doesn't get it right and doesn't get it perfect, she just like wants to quit. If she doesn't win in a game and she keeps losing, she wants to give up. And I remember I was telling her, we were playing Uno. You guys ever play the game Uno? And we were playing Uno, and we kept winning, and she wasn't winning. Like, all the kids and all of us were winning. My 4-year-old son, like, he just wins all the time. All the time. And so we were playing Uno, and she wasn't winning. Everybody else was winning. She wasn't winning. She started to cry. She wanted to give up. And I told her, I said, listen, Gabies don't quit. That's what I told her first. I said, Gabies don't quit. I said, your name is Victory. You know what that means? Your name is Victory. That means you're going to have victory even when you fail. You're going to have victory even when you want to quit. Victory is only born when you feel like you're failing. When you fail victory, it's an opportunity for you to learn how to win in the midst of your failure. Because we have a whole generation right now, if you look at kids' sports and stuff, well, everybody gets a trophy, everyone gets a ribbon. That is the worst thing, in my opinion, that you could do to a child. No, that's not life. The reality of it is there are losers and there are winners. And if you think that every time you lose a game you're a winner, it's not going to teach you how to win when you are a loser, so you get back up and get better. You're just going to think that, hey, we're all winners, but that's not reality. That's not reality. So we're teaching our kids how to live up to their name. Your name is Victory. Your name is Promise. It's funny because my daughter's name's Promise, and one of the things that she would struggle with is her patience. And how many know you have to be patient to receive your promise? You got to learn patience, right? You follow me, right? And we got to teach a generation how to live up to who they are. Not who the media tells them they should be, that they're always just a winner. No. In Christ, you're always a winner even when you fail. The beautiful thing about the kingdom is that even when you fail, you're still winning, because as long as you get back up, a righteous man may fall 7 times. Or may stumble 7 times, but he'll get back up again. That's what winning in the kingdom looks like. When you stumble, you get back up again. When you relapse, you get back up again. When you screw up, you get back up again. That's what winning looks like. And so, we've stepped out in faith, and we've done a few things to step out in faith. And I in the latter part of 2016, in the midst of when we feel really like we lost everything, and we're starting all over again, I had this idea: what would it look like to film the journey of wrestling in faith for a promise that doesn't make any sense? What would it look like? What would it look like? What would it look like to film this journey? And I got connected with the producer, one of the producers of the show Hoarders. Do you guys never heard the show Hoarders? Anybody ever watch it? It's a just once. Well, was a very high grossing show at one point on A&E, and it started in 2009, and really it just documents the disease of hoarding. And it's really actually quite sad when you watch. And it's a real thing. It's a real problem. And so I got connected through, a bunch of different connections in that industry, this producer of Hoarders. And he's a kingdom guy, and we talked on the phone, and I shared with him this idea of what would it look like to film the faith in the everyday, and what would it look like to document a story or the journey of going through an intense process of what feels like failing and also what feels like succeeding, and showing the God component in it. And so we stepped out in faith and had a bunch of people get on board and helping us, begin to film part of the pilot, and as well as like a teaser video. And it was, for us, more than anything, it was a test of faith to say, because sometimes I believe this, that you have to do radical things in faith when you have radical promises. Like if God says you're going to be this, then and it's so out there, it doesn't make any sense. You have to do some radical things sometimes, almost as a form of accountability. This is my opinion, okay? This is how I feel when I read the scripture. This is how I feel when I connect with my Father in heaven, that I know, God, man, if you've called me to something great, there are going to be great steps along the way. It's not going to just happen. It's not going to just come. And so I'm going to position my life in any way that I can, and I'm going to maybe make mistakes along the way, but I'd rather make a mistake and potentially succeed than never try at all for the fear of making a mistake. If I want to bring your attention to a passage of scripture out of Deuteronomy. Can we go there really quick? If you have your Bible, out of Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses is, and God is speaking through Moses, and really it's all about preparing a people in the wilderness to get ready to come into the promised land. It's all about, okay, so when you get in there, just so you know, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, you're going to have this obstacle, you're going to have that obstacle. When you get to the promise, this is what you need to know. So while you're in the wilderness, I got to get you ready. I got to get you ready for what's about to come, because I want to say this at the onset. I believe that God is going to recalibrate the way you think about certain things after today's message. I think God's going to recalibrate the way that you perceive Him in the seasons that you are living right now in your life. And often we think, oh, the wilderness is really hard. No, what's really hard is being on top of the mountain. The wilderness actually is the easiest part of our faith journey, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to show you why. The mountain is always the hardest part of our faith journey, but we think for some reason that when we're in what we call a desert, people say it all the time, oh, I'm in a desert, brother. I'm not hearing God. Well, maybe you are hearing God. You're just not hearing Him the way that you used to hear Him. Because in every new season, God tries to speak through a different angle to you to shape a different part of you that's never been shaped before. So when you're in a new season of struggle, and we should never say like, okay, God's disconnected Himself from me, or God's not speaking. No, God is always speaking. God is a communication-oriented God. He doesn't shut up. That's the way that it used to be. Jesus is in you, resident within you. He's always yapping. But the thing is, we're yapping too much and complaining about our situation to lean in to hear what He's saying, because what He's saying just may sound and be different than what He was saying in the last season. So Deuteronomy 8, 1-5, they're about to cross over. They're getting ready to cross over into their promised land. And it says this out of the Message translation: keep and live out the entire commandment that I'm commanding you today, so that you'll live and prosper and enter and own the land that God promised to your ancestors. In other words, there is a chance that when you get to the land of prosperity, you won't prosper. See, you've been a tenant in the wilderness, but God's called you to be an owner in the promised land. And if you can't learn to be a good tenant in the wilderness, if you can't learn to be a good renter and take care of someone else's property, when you get your own property, you're just going to ruin it. So I'm teaching you, I'm setting you up for what it's going to look like for you to own land. But there's a chance that when you finally get to the land of your prosperity, the promised land, the ideal, that you're going to screw it up. That's what he's saying here. So remember, make sure that you keep everything that I'm telling you, keep these preparations in your heart. Then he says this: remember every road that God led you on for 40 years in the wilderness. I love that, because sometimes we forget, right? So we're here in this season right now, and we're struggling with the same things we struggled with 30 years ago, but we don't remember that struggle because it looks different. And Jesus is saying to us, hey, okay, you're on this new road now. Remember what it was like when you were struggling over here? I'm the same God yesterday as I am today. So remember that if I led you through it then, I'll lead you through it now. Remember. Think back to all the roads you've ever been on and the struggles you've been on. Man, you don't have to be in fear. If we could get this when we're in fear, because I go through this. I'm in a season right now, or I feel this, and God keeps speaking to me over and over again. Remember, Shawn. Remember, Shawn. Although you felt like you were pushed to your limit, it didn't totally break you in every way. It just cracked you a little bit. Because you see, a cracked pot will always reflect light. A broken pot will not reflect any light. But the good thing about God is that sometimes when life breaks us, when we let Him in to restore us, He restores us, but not in the way that we think. He restores us with these cracks so that people will get a picture of the new light that's in us now that could never reflect before when we were all perfect and we had it all together. I don't think you heard that. God wants you to be a cracked pot. a pot that maybe you've been broken, but you've been restored. And because you've been restored, you can restore others by releasing the light that shines through the cracks in your life that says, hey, I'm not perfect, but I have a perfect God. In every way, that's shining his light through my imperfections. I'm perfectly imperfect, thank God. Remember every road that God led you on for the 40 years in the wilderness, pushing you to what? Say it. Limits. Pushing you to your limits. Pushing you to your limits. What does that tell you? You have limits, right? Everyone say, I have limits. You know, we hear this a lot in these cliche slogans like, there's no limits in God. But the reality is, even in God, there are limits, and our humanity has limits. There are limits. It's within limits that we have the most liberation. It's within our limits, it's within embracing our limitation that we find the most freedom. You know that. It's in the midst of the guidelines and the guide rails that we find the most level of breakthrough. Proverbs 18 talks about those with no vision cast off restraint. In other words, it means cast off the limitations or the guide rails that are needed to have vision. There's no barriers to keep you on track on the road to success. And because you have no vision, you have no barriers. But when you have vision, you live within the limitations that God surrounds you with. And because of that, your vision ends up being fulfilled. So limitations are actually a good thing. But God loves, I believe this, pushing us to our limits. We hear this all the time. Well, God will never give you more than you can handle, right? You hear that? It's actually a very false statement because it's always used out of context. He's speaking about temptation. God actually will always give you more than you can handle. He will push you to your limit. He will push you to your end point so that you could come to the end of yourself and let him help you come to the beginning of yourself. That's what the law did, right? Galatians, the law was a tutor to bring you to the end of yourself, to reveal Christ, who is everything, the fulfillment of the law, to bring you to the beginning of yourself. He is the author, the beginning, and he's the finisher of your faith. The law just helped you along the way get there. You get what I'm saying? It showed you how screwed up you were. It showed you that you're all a bunch of freaks and weirdos, and without Christ and his grace, you're nothing. And the only way you're ever going to achieve the impossible is if you take the I'm out of the equation. The me-centered part out of the equation. And when you take the I'm out of the equation, all things become possible when they feel impossible. It says here, pushing you to your limits, testing you so that he would know what you were made of. Do you know that your limitations show you what level of leader that you are? Your limitations will always reveal what kind of leader you really are on the inside. You letting God bring you to the end of yourself. You letting your season bring you to the end of yourself. You letting your situation mentor you and push you. You letting yourself get to the very end of yourself will always reveal to you the level of leader that's on the inside of you. God was pushing them, allowing situations to push them to the end of themselves, because what would happen is, see, without that, they trusted in themselves too much. You know why a whole generation died off in the wilderness? Is because God knew if they can't deal with faith now when they have to, they will not be able to deal in faith when they don't have to on the mountain. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom. Why? Because there comes a point in life when you reach a level of success that you think you got there all on your own. That's why he's saying, remember who it was that brought you here. Because the moment you forget, you start thinking it was all about you. And so it takes more faith to live on the mountain than it does in the wilderness. Because in the wilderness you have to, on the mountain you get to. And when you get to, it's a choice that you have to make to remember, wait a minute, I didn't get here on my own. I'm not my own God. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom. I didn't create this. It's God who gives me the power to get wealth. It's part of the humility process. He says, testing you so that you would know what you were made of, whether you keep his commandments or not. He put you through hard times. He made you go hungry. Then he fed you with manna, something neither you or your parents knew anything about. So you would learn that men and women do not live by bread only. We live by every word that comes from God's mouth. Your clothes didn't wear out and your feet didn't blister for 40 years. You learned deep in your heart that God disciplines you in the same way a father disciplines his child. You see, you're a child when you're in the wilderness. But you're a man or you're a woman when you're on the mountain. You're a warrior in training when you're going through the hard desert times. But when you're on the mountain and you're actually fighting real battles and you're actually facing real giants, that's when that training starts to produce results. And that's where the greatest form of opposition comes. Because now you got to apply everything you learned in the wilderness when you have to, when you had to, and now you have to apply it when you get to. You tracking with me? You tracking with me? I just believe that today God wants us to start loving our limitation. I want to speak to you very quickly on loving our limitation. Write that down. Loving our limitation. And I believe that this is the secret sauce to your calling. It's the secret sauce to your calling. It is the juice. It's the energy behind your calling. When you learn to love reaching your limitation, when you learn to love pushing your spiritual body to your limits, when you love letting God take you through the hard times and practicing learning how to trust him in those hard times, when you learn to love it, you're going to set yourself up for the greatest form of liberation you've ever had in your life. You know, the pendulum is always swinging. How many know that the moment you feel like you find balance in life, the pendulum of life swings another way and you have to find another level of balance? And I don't believe that there is a form. I don't believe people always say, well, it's like the classic God first, family second, you know, and then career third. Let's just say it's God in everything. It's God in your family. It's God in your career. When he's first and you can't, there's no formula because everybody's grid's different. Well, okay, so I feel bad. Well, I look at somebody, wow, look how much time they spend with their kids. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like a bad parent. I feel like a bad father. And there's over here, look how much time they spend on their business. Look, oh, I feel like a horrible, leader. Look how much time they spend with God. Oh, I feel like a horrible, prayer person. There's no reference point. How do you build a formula for what it looks like to put God first? Now, I just believe this. If God is first, he's in your mind, he's in your heart. You love him with all your soul, all your mind, all your strength in every situation. When you're with your kids, when you're doing what you're called to do, when you're with your family, it's going to work. It's not that complicated. And as long as you're on the search and pursuit of balance, you're in balance. Pursuing balance always looks like true balance because the pendulum is always swinging. Write this down if you can. Limitations are given to safeguard us. Limitations are given to safeguard us. I can always know a good restaurant when I look at their menu. How many foodies do we have in the house here? How many real foodies? Like, I'm not talking about you go to Montana's. You're not a foodie if you go to like Montana's. I'm talking about like real foodies. Anybody? Nobody? You're in London? There's nothing? No? London? Okay. Yeah, come on. There's only 4? Only 4 people really love good food. Wow, no wonder Harvey's is prospering in London. No condemnation for those that, yeah. I just love good food, I tried sea urchin for the first time in LA last weekend. Anybody ever had raw, live sea urchin? Yeah, it was disgusting, but I tried it, and it's part of the experience, And but I can usually tell when I go into a restaurant if it's going to be good or not based upon how limited the menu is. You know when you go to a menu and it's like, or a restaurant and there's like 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9 pages of options, you just know there's no way that they're going to be able to do anything really good. If they have to manage all of that, they're taking out like chicken that's been microwaved probably 7 days ago. They got it all ready to go. They're heating it up, and you just don't know. They're heating it up in the microwave. It looks good in presentation, but you don't know how fresh it is. I'm kind of just joking. But you know what I mean. You get the point. That when a menu is limited, you know that, man, they must be really good at what they do. There must be a confidence in what they do. There's something about loving limitation. There's something about how it safeguards us. You know you're going to get quality. When there's limitation, you know you're going to get quality. When there's no limitation, quality control is really hard to manage. It's really hard to manage. Too many options equals paralysis. Equals paralysis. You know, I heard this statement recently about how, you know, Netflix is like a sign of how the generation that exists right now, and not just the millennial generation, but even and beyond, how Netflix is a sign that we're becoming more and more indecisive. Because you could go on Netflix, there's so many options now that you're like, I want to watch a movie, and you just can't decide. How many know you spend a half an hour, who does that? A half an hour trying to decide which movie to watch, and then by the time you pick a movie, it's like 10 p.m. and you got to get up at 5 in the morning. You're like, forget the movie. Too many options, no limitations, equals a state of paralysis, which then robs you of the experience that you could have. You know? Limitations are really good. Limitations are really good. Ingvar Kamprad, you guys know who that is probably. He was somebody that started with great limitation. He had no money, and he decided to use his limitations. He decided to love his limitations. He decided to say, you know, I believe that I'm called to something great, so I'm going to use what I have. And so he started selling matchsticks as a business. That's all he had. He started selling matchsticks. And not too long after, IKEA was born. You just never know what can be birthed through embracing limitation. Here's a guy, I mean, half of you in this room probably have IKEA furniture in their house. How many have IKEA furniture in your house? How many love building IKEA furniture? Probably nobody. Yeah, probably nobody. But there's something about looking at the storyboard of someone that has built an empire that has changed the state of how people buy and get a hold of furniture for a good cost. This guy started selling matchsticks and turned that business into what we know today as IKEA. He used his limitation. I want to give you 4 quick points today. If you can take some notes. I only have a few minutes. Ooh, it's 12:25. How much grace time do I have?
It's all good. So you're done.
I just want to be sensitive. I know the kids. I know how it is. So, but I want to give you 4 keys in how to utilize, or 4 outcomes, or 4 realities that go into how we learn how to love our limitations. Because I think the question is always, well, how do we really love our limitations? How do we embrace them? How do we get to know them? Number 1, write this down. You got to learn your limits. You got to learn your limits. Write that down. You got to learn your limits. You know, there was, back in the day, before there was a high-tech solution, when they were doing mining, coal mining and gold mining, anybody in the mining industry? I don't know, anybody, maybe you know somebody in the mining industry, but back in the day when they didn't have a lot of high-tech solutions to safeguard, mines from exploding and people from dying in the mining industry, they found this solution. They used their limitations, and they said, listen, what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in these canary birds. And these canary birds would actually, because canaries, if you know what a canary is, they sing a lot. They're like songbirds. They sing. They're always chirping. They're always singing. They're always happy. And because of these mines that were being mined out by all these people, there was so many deaths and so many explosions happening because the poisonous gases, the carbon monoxide. They had to find a solution to safeguard the miners, and so they'd bring these canaries in because canaries were really sensitive to poisonous gas. So they'd be chirping all day long, they'd be singing all day long, and as soon as they would stop singing in the mine, it was a sign that there was time to get out of the mine. It was a sign that the health of the atmosphere had reached its limit, and they'd get out before the explosion. I have one question for you. What and who are the canaries in your life right now that you can define? Think about every time that you have reached your limit but went past your limit, and maybe it ended really bad. Think about every time maybe it was a business deal that went sour and your wife told you, because the wife usually is always right. All the wives are like hitting their husbands right now. Maybe it was a situation with one of your children that you kind of saw the signs, but you didn't step in. The canaries were chirping. Okay, they're not doing well. Step in. They're not doing well. And you waited till it got too bad. And it's harder to fix sometimes when it gets too bad. I want you to begin to identify in your life who the canaries are in your life. Maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your husband, maybe it's one of your kids, maybe it's one of your friends, it's a coworker, it's a boss at your work. There's always a canary that's chirping, that stops chirping along the way to tell you, hey, you know what, you're going past the grace of God right now. God wants to bring you back in. You've got to learn our limits. Are you with me? We got to learn our limits. Let's go back here because God always works within our limits. Deuteronomy 8. Remember it says this. Remember every road that God led you on for the 40 years. This is verse 8, verse 1 to 5. Every road that God led you on for 40 years in the wilderness, pushing you to your limits, testing you so that he would know what you were made of. The test is really important in the wilderness, but the test is always different in the wilderness than it is when you're on the mountain. It's always different. Because if you crack in an unhealthy way and don't let God restore you while you're in the wilderness, you will shatter when you're on the mountain. God does not want to promote something that is going to be taken out right away. So bring your attention back to the context of what is being said here, is that there is something ahead for you that you've yet to experience. But to get there, there's always a preparation process. How do I know? Because let's go here. Let's go. I said earlier that it's always going to take more faith to live on the mountain than it does to live in the wilderness. But we often think it's so hard in the desert. I'm parched. I'm thirsty. But man, when you have nothing to lose. When you're in the dump and you got nothing, and man, you're going to be the most generous people. Just look at third world countries. North America is stingy in a lot of ways in comparison to a lot of poor countries. Because prosperity has nothing to do with material possession. It has to do with a heart posture and a mindset. I can be more generous as the widow with one mite than you and your riches with $10 million. Because it doesn't even put a dent in your pocket. You see the difference? It takes more faith when you have more to lose than it does when you have nothing to lose. Are you tracking with me here? It's called forced faith. When you're in the wilderness, it's called forced faith. It's forced on you, so to speak. You have no food. So what do you have to do? You're forced to have to believe that somehow out of the sky, quail's going to come out of the sky. Somehow you're going to have to believe that water's going to come from a rock. Somehow you're going to have to believe, because if God led you to it, he'll always lead you through it. So somehow you got to believe that this substance is just going to appear on the ground called manna. That's called forced faith. And it still takes faith, but it's a lot easier when you have to. You see, you're tracking with me. It's like the person that prays in faith when their mother or their father is diagnosed with cancer, but they don't pray that much before that, right? It's like the anxiety prayers. It forces you to start leaning into, okay, God, now I got to believe it. It's been really good for the last 20 years. I don't really pray that much, but now all of a sudden I'm panic praying all the time. I hope this is grabbing a hold of you a little bit. Verse 10. So why do I know? Why do we know that it's harder on the mountain? Verse 10, chapter 8, verse 10. When you have eaten your fill, when you get there. So when you get there, when you've passed through this painful process that feels like it's really hard, just get ready. It's going to get even harder. When you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be sure to praise the Lord. I love that. Be sure, because you might not praise the Lord. You might feel like you've arrived, sit back, vacation from God. The wilderness has been so hard. You know what I'm talking about? Like for ministry people a lot of the time. I'm guilty of this. I go on vacation. I don't often want to get into God conversations. And that sounds really bad. I'm just being totally vulnerable with you. I don't want to talk to anybody when I go on vacation sometimes. Because I'm always having to be on, and sometimes I just want to take a vacation. I know God is with me, and I'm in a rest mode, but man, I don't want to get into these long ministry conversations. You get what I'm saying? I sound really unspiritual, but I'm just being honest. There's some times where I just don't want to talk to the guy next to me on the plane. But then God speaks to me, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do it, and I do it, and good things happen, but I don't want to do it. You know, my desire is not there. I'm like, just stop talking to me. You get what I'm saying? So when you've eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord for your good, the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. But that, listen to this, verse 11, that is the time to be careful. It was hard in the wilderness, but man, when you're on the mountain, when you're in the promise, when you got it, that's the time where you got to be the most careful. You get the business, the deal goes through, the contract goes through, it's signed, you get the house. Finally, you have been renting for 20 years. You get your first house. You build your first house. You finally find your wife. I mean, you've tried so many women. It sounds really bad. You've tried so many men. They were all failures. You finally get the one that God had for you. You didn't need to go through all that stuff. You finally get there. And it's in that moment, he's like, now, don't screw it up. Be careful, right? Make sure you got some canaries around you. Don't screw it up. You've been pushing for so long. This is going to be the most tempting part of your journey now. It wasn't in the wilderness. It's when you have the opportunity to forget that it was me that got you here. That's the most tempting part. But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty, verse 11, you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I'm giving you today. Verse 12, for when you have become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large and your silver and your gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget the Lord your God who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. He's talking to people that weren't even in Egypt. A whole generation has died off. Remember not to forget that the people that have already died off because their inability to trust me. Remember not to forget who brought them out of Egypt. Even though right now all you know is mobile church in the wilderness, setting up, tearing down, it's all you know. You've kind of lost everything. You've lost the previous generation. You've lost, in a sense, the faith of the previous generation. Now it's just you in the wilderness. Don't forget. I don't want you to forget. Verse 15, do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from the rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. You see, because you learn about God's provision in the wilderness, but you learn to provide as a king in the promised land. You go from being a tenant to an owner. It's a very different mindset. Oftentimes, tenants will not take care of a property the same way an owner will. Because the owner has invested interest. I have labored for this thing. I have paid. I have stretched myself. There has been pain along the journey. The tenant enjoys the provision, and the tenant enjoys not really having to cut the grass that much, letting the weeds grow, letting the moss grow in the interlock, destroying the interlock, the tenant doesn't have to do that. The pressure is different. But when you're an owner, you learn how to provide. You don't just learn about God the provider. You learn that God the provider in you learns how to provide. There's a God in you that wants to provide. There's something about God creating you and calling you as a king to start owning and investing in the land, cultivating the land, learning how to build. Because you weren't building in the wilderness. God was building in you. And now on the promised land, he's building around you. He's building everything inside of you first before he can get you on the ground so you can begin to build everything around you he's called you to build. Verse 16, he fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. He did this to humble you. Moses actually was considered the most humble man that ever lived. Think about what Moses had to go through, and he didn't even make it to the promised land. Didn't even make it. Did all this to humble you. In other words, you lost all this. You were pushed to your limits. You feel like you started all over again. But all this was to give you a humility so that when you get onto the mountain, you know who brought you there. Because if you leave the wilderness in pride, pride will take you out and cause you to fall when you're on the mountain. Because pride always comes before the fall. And it's a lot harder to fall, a lot more painful to fall down a mountain than fall in the wilderness. You fall in the wilderness, you get back up again. It's all good. It's not very high distance to fall. When you're on the mountaintop and you're in pride, I got here by myself. I don't need God. When you fall, everybody sees it. No one cares when you fall in the wilderness. Everyone cares when you get to the mountain, they see you fall. Like, I told you so. They didn't deal with their junk in the trunk. It's all coming back. It's all coming back. It's all coming back. It's all coming back. So humility happens in the wilderness. So humility can be a state of being in the promised land. Verse 17, he did all this so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. He allowed you to come into a place of reaching your limits in life. So you could come to a place where you can say, I didn't do this in my own strength. I didn't do this in my own strength. Verse 18, last verse. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you the power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors with an oath. Remember, when you get there, remember the power to get wealth. That word for wealth means armies. Literally means, one of the definitions is armies. He gives you the power to command armies. What do armies do? Armies overtake, overthrow, overcome. And what happens when they overtake, overthrow, and overcome a city or a place? They get the booty. Not that kind of booty, but the good kind of booty, the healthy, holy kind of booty. They get the booty. They get the plunder. They get the gold. They get the wealth, right? Wealth comes as a result of overtaking, overcoming, and overthrowing when you are led by Jesus. In every situation, when you break down barriers, guess what? There is booty attached to that barrier. Holy booty. There's plunder. There's provision, there's abundance on the other side of that barrier. Because after every barrier, across the other side of every barrier is a new breakthrough. On the other side of every barrier is a new breakthrough. You're getting that? When you keep going and you keep pushing, there is a breakthrough and a blessing always on the other side. And even if you don't see it, the blessing's within you that says, hey, you didn't give up. And that's a trait that will be passed down to every generation. And there's nothing greater than a good man that leaves an inheritance for his children's children and my grandchildren, knowing that, hey, grandpa didn't give up when he could have. He didn't quit. He didn't give up. Your limits let you into the level of leader that you are. Write that down. Let that become a part of who you are. When you reach your limits, you say, hey man, I'm going to love my limitation. It's the secret sauce to my calling. I'm going to embrace them with everything in me because it's going to reveal who I really am. What's already on the inside of me. Number 2, write this down. I got to speed through this. Lean into your limits. Don't just learn your limits. Lean into your limits. You know, Southwest Airlines years ago, they had to develop what they call the 10-minute turnaround. And they were at a place in their company where they only had 4 planes doing trips, and they were in financial trouble. So what they had to do was they had to stop one of their fleets, one of their planes, and they only used 3 planes. And they decided to say, okay, we're gonna try to figure out a way. We're gonna use our limitation for us. We're gonna lean into our limitation, and we're gonna keep the same amount of flights with less planes. And so it forced them to develop something they called the 10-minute turnaround time. That they could do the same with less. Instead of less with more, they're going to do the same with less. And that totally changed the face. It totally changed everything in their company that we know as Southwest Airlines today. They leaned into their limitations. Moses, what was the first thing that he said? I mean, here's a guy that's instructing the people. What did he say when God called him? He said, like, I can't. I got to stutter. I can't. I don't think that I'm the guy. I can't do it. God said, I've called you to lead a whole people out of after 400 years of slavery. I've called you to lead them out of slavery and into what I've been prophesying for years. Beginning with Abraham, I got a promise with them to fulfill, and you're the guy that's going to be a part of preparing the way for it to be fulfilled. And Moses is like, man, I can't. I got to stutter. I can't talk. I can't talk. Use somebody else. But there was something about Moses in that moment that he was the most humble man. There was something about that even in the midst of his lack of confidence in himself, even in the midst of his limitation, he was able to acknowledge his humanity in that moment. And as a result, I believe God said, okay, you know what? I'm going to make you the most humble man that ever lived. Because you can't do it, you will do it. Some of you, all of you, you can't fulfill the calling of God over your life. And the moment you come to the awareness that you can't do it, you will do it. When you can't do it because you realize that you don't have the skills, you don't have the what you think you need, but if God's called you, he's given the provision to you, and if the moment you start to become aware of your humanity and embrace your limitation is the moment you start inviting God into the struggle, God into the weakness. And when God comes into the weakness, he makes you strong when you are weak. Lean into your I know that for us, when we lost our church, we learned to lean into our limitations, and it made us more innovative as a culture than we'd ever been before. More innovative than we'd ever been before. It forced us to think different about our situation. It was forced faith in the sense that we began to start seeing that our obstacle was our opportunity. So we had to lean into our limitations as a mobile community, and it forced innovation to happen in a way that we'd never experienced before. I love this quote. Philosopher, theologian, Soren, can't say his last name. The more a person limits himself, the more resourceful he becomes. Sometimes the more you cut back on your budget, the more you learn how to steward your budget really well. Sometimes becoming lean in a season forces you to learn things that you would never learn otherwise. Limiting your food intake or healthy or bad food intake sometimes forces you and teaches you, man, what good food can actually do for your body. It forces you. Sometimes when you have lack in your life, it actually is a good thing because it forces you to start to become aware and more thankful and have a deeper sense of gratitude to what you do have. Lean into your limits. Number 3, write this down. We're almost done. Lead within your limits. Lead within your limits. I love this 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. I'm going to read this quickly about Paul. Because of the extravagance of those revelations, he's going to the third heaven, having these crazy experiences. And so I wouldn't get a big head. I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in constant touch with my limitations. This was not some sort of, there's a big battle, theological battle between what it was. I don't believe it was a physical ailment. God did not punish him. God didn't. But there, before, if you read the context, he had all this pressure, tribulations, being shipwrecked, being flogged. I mean, the guy went through trouble. There's no questioning that. The guy went through crap. But how many know that crap is used to fertilize a field? Some of you got this field. It's a beautiful field. You planted your seed. But what you haven't gone through yet is any crap. And the crap actually is what forms you to become what you need to become to fertilize all the seeds that you've been planting for 20 years. And so Paul said, okay, hey, I got this crap. I got this thing that's buffeting me. I mean, it smells. It's annoying. I can't even get rid of it. I prayed 3 times. It won't go away. So instead of trying to get rid of it, I'm going to embrace the limitations that are on me. I'm going to lean into it. And this guy changed. Like the face of what we know the church is. Every single century, he keeps changing it. He keeps changing us. By reading these epistles that he wrote, these letters that he wrote, his life is a living epistle that keeps changing our lives every day. And if Paul went through it, then I can go through it. So somebody really gave me a bad comment on Facebook. Shoot, I'm being persecuted. I mean, Paul, he's being flogged, man. I mean, he's getting his you-know-what kicked all the time. And you're being persecuted on Facebook because someone didn't agree with your political belief. Shut up. Paul went through some crazy stuff, man. And he said, listen, I'm going to go through the crazy stuff and let it fertilize my field. I got a big harvest coming. I'm going to use my limitation for my benefit. You know, the same sword that Goliath was going to use to cut off David's head. When you become what God's called you to become, and you start walking out faith and you face those giants, you know what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing the weapons that are used for you. You're going to see them as something that you're going to use against the very thing that wants to take you out. You'll cut off that giant's head with the very weapon that he's going to use to cut off your head, or was going to try to use to cut off your head. You become so strategic. You become so intuitive. You all of a sudden start seeing things the way they really are, and you start using the limitations and the obstacles for your advantage. Because it was really the sword that sealed the deal for David and Goliath, right? We know that. I mean, we don't know what would have happened. Maybe this Goliath guy would have gotten up after about an hour being KO'd. We just don't know exactly. But he wanted to finish the deal. It was like, that Mortal Kombat, finish him. I don't know if you've ever seen that or heard that. But anyways, lead within your limitations. I'm almost done, I promise. We decided to, we didn't really decide, but we knew it was God, and we were told that we had to leave our building this fall of 2015. And when we did that, we had to take up an offering to raise funds to go mobile, because we needed about $120,000 to go mobile, buy a truck, buy a trailer, all this stuff. We had to learn a new life, like a touring roadshow, so to speak. And so we had to raise a bunch of money. And we just knew that it was going to be a step of faith, and we only had literally like a month to raise the money. It was a very short period of time. We only had, really a couple days notice. And so when I first heard the news, and so we had to raise some money. And God, we were going through a season, my wife and I, where we had been saving up this really large sum of money. Well, it felt large to us at the time, really large sum of money to refurnish our current house. We were going to refurnish our whole house and refinish our kitchen. And so we've been saving up this money for a few years in this specific account. And when we were told that we had to leave our building, God spoke to us and said, I want you to lead the charge on the giving. And I don't say this to promote myself, so to speak. I want to encourage you in faith, is that we really felt that God spoke to us to do it radically. And we said, and God said to us, I want you to give your entire furniture seed in the offering. So it was $10,000. At that time, it was quite a bit of money that we had saved separately for this. So we gave our entire furniture seed into the offering. This is above and beyond all of our normal giving. Okay, this is not like, okay, I'm taking all the giving I should have been doing. No, we're like one of the top givers in our church. We lead by example. If you're a leader, you should lead by example. Don't wait for someone else to be ahead of you. You lead by example. You do what you got to do to be the leader. And so we stepped out in faith, and we gave this $10,000 seed. And I remember, man, it was hard for us, because it was like we had been saving this to refurnish our house, and we sowed it. I remember we sowed it in tears. And that verse kept coming to me, those that sow in tears will reap a harvest of joy. We sowed it in tears, because in that scripture, that context, it's talking about a harvester or a farmer that has just at the end of himself. He doesn't know what to do. Every crop has failed, and this is the last straw. And so he's sowing in tears his last seed. That's the context of that verse. He's sowing his last seed. That's why he's sowing in tears. We sowed this, and it was in September of 2015. Fast forward 1 year later, through a series of events, on the day that we had our daughter harvest, we bought a plot of land to build a house. And it was a crazy story, and the way that it all happened. But we needed to furnish this new house. We'd given all of our money that we were going to use for furniture in the last house that we could have used in the new house. We gave it away. But remember, we sowed, we believed, we led from our limitation. And 1 year later, listen to this, to the week, okay? I'm not exaggerating. 1 year later, from September to September, when we sowed that $10,000, 1 year later, a businessman sat me down with not knowing the situation, not knowing what was going on, just knew that we were building a house and we were moving in 3.5 months. And he sat me down. I remember where it was in a coffee shop. And he said to me, Shawn, I don't know why my wife and I really feel like we are supposed to do this for you. We feel that we are to completely furnish your new house. And we want you can go pick out any furniture you want, customize it, whatever. We'll pay for the whole thing. We were given $20,000 worth of brand new furniture to furnish our whole house. We were given more than we would have been able to get with the $10,000. You see what God will do with your money? When you sacrifice, God doesn't care that much about the little that you give. He cares about the sacrifice in your heart. If it means something to you, it means something to Him. If it doesn't mean anything to you, it doesn't mean squat to Him. God looks at the heart. Always. That's why the widow would be remembered over the rich man that was giving out of his abundance. The widow was like, man, she gave all that she had. It's the heart. It isn't the substance, it's the heart. I love that story. I think about that. I remember who it was that got us to where I look at the furniture. I sit on the furniture. I'm like, man, this is a God story. You should hear the God stories that I have with that house. My builder was like, I don't know who you guys are. This is so weird. We finished your basement by accident, gave you like $10,000 worth of brand new stuff for free. We didn't even know why. This has never happened before. We insulated your garage by accident and we invoiced the neighbor and he got ticked off. I said, hey, this is God. You're part of my miracle. Thank you. It's part of my miracle. Lead from your limits. Last point. I'm done, I promise. Launch from your limits. Launch from your limits. God wants you to launch from that place of limitation. From that place of limitation. I want you to stand up with me. Launch from that place of limitation. You know, Dr. Seuss, who we all know, he wrote his most famous book in 50 words. The book that Dr. Seuss wrote that is the most famous and well-known was 50 words. His whole credibility, his whole, the face of who he is today as an author of children's books was really launched from using his limitation, from using something that would be defined as impossible, its limitation. His most famous book was 50 years. How many in this room feel like they're in a place where maybe they've reached their limit? There's limitation all around them. You feel limited in your finances. You feel limited in your household in specific ways. You feel limited in your job. You feel limited in areas because maybe you're sick in your body. You just feel like you're at that place where you've reached your limit. Let me just say, if you could just take a moment to embrace that limitation and say, okay, God, I'm going to let you into the limitation. I'm going to let you into the limitation. I'm going to let your liberty, I'm going to let your freedom into that place that feels like limitation, that feels like a stronghold, that feels like a barrier. I'm going to let you in. I'm going to let you in. If you could just raise your hands just for a few seconds, if you feel comfortable, just raise your hands. Because Jesus embraced his limitation as a human so he could reestablish his connection with all of us. He was sent, the Bible says he emptied himself, so to speak, of all the rights and privileges that he had as the Son of God himself, so he could relate to humanity, so he could become the human sacrifice that would set all of us free. It was in his limitation that he launched the greatest act of all humanity. From him, his limitation, he came to a place, even Jesus, he said, listen, I can't do this in the garden. I can't drink this death, this cup. I can't die on the cross. It's too hard. He came to the end of himself to come to the beginning of himself. Even Jesus modeled what it looked like to embrace his limitation. And the moment he began to embrace his limitation of he can't do it, something changed within him and he said, wait a minute, I can do it if it's your will. So the shift was, I can't do it, but when it's your will, I can do it. My limitation is only an entry point. It's a doorway to embracing God's limitless, liberating power that changes everything. God, we embrace our limitations today. We feel small in certain ways. We feel like we don't have. We feel like we're not enough. We feel like we should be somewhere where we're not. We always want the next thing. We always want to escape the process. We feel like we're just so limited. Well, if you knew what happened to me when I was 6 years old, if you knew what happened to me when I had this, and when this happened to me, if you just knew this is why I'm so limited. No, you know what? That limited feeling that you have is just a setup to help liberate so many people around you, and all you have to do is embrace it. You say, I can't, and he will. You say, I can't, and he will. That's exactly where God wants you to be. It's the I can't do it. I'm going to embrace my limitation. I'm going to love my limitation. I'm going to love it. I'm going to pour that secret sauce over every situation in my life. It's the sauce for my calling. I'm going to pour that sauce over everything. Even if I feel cracked, even if I feel broken, even if I feel messed up, you know what? God's going to use it. God's going to use it. God's going to use it. Maybe you're in this room and you've never let Jesus into your life. You don't know what would happen to you if you were to die today. You don't know what would be next. You don't have that assurance. Maybe you're on the fence. There's only so long you can stay on the fence before things start hurting. Just try it. It's destroying you right now. You're in the middle. You're on the fence. You're struggling. You don't know what to do. Maybe you're in the situation somebody brought you here for the first time and you just don't know what would happen if you left this building and a car hits you. You don't know. You don't have that confidence. All you have to do, the Bible says in Romans 10, that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the real deal, that He is God, that He is Lord, and you believe in your heart that He was actually raised from the dead to raise you from the death that you're living right now, if you believe that, everything changes. There's a promise that you will be saved. Saved from what? Yourself. Saved from yourself, destroying yourself and robbing you of that disconnect from God for all eternity. God wants you in. God wants you in relationship now. He designed you for relationship. If you're in this room now, just for a moment with every eye closed in this room, if you're in this room and you've never let Jesus in, you're saying, hey, this message has hit me. I feel like I'm limited on all sides. Maybe you're limited because you've never let Jesus into your life as the centerpiece of your life. This is your moment. Change your game. It's going to change your life forever. This is the moment where everything begins to change. If you do not know what would happen next, if you're in this room and you want to let Jesus in, I just want to give you an opportunity to be bold with every eye closed in here, to put up your hand. Just put up your hand right now if that's you. You want to let Jesus into your life right now. Just put your hand up real high so heaven can see it right now. Just put your hand up. The greatest decision you'll ever make in your life. Let's say this together. Say, Jesus, I believe you're the real deal. You are God. I want to let you in today. I receive your forgiveness. You're awesome. I believe that you were raised to new life to give me new life. So I'm starting a relationship today. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. If you said that, you meant it for the first time. It's the greatest decision you'll ever make in your entire life. Make sure you talk to somebody before you leave that's a part of this house. Let them pray for you. But for the rest of us, I'm just going to dismiss you officially. I'm going to share a few more things. I'm going to pray for a few people if that's okay. But you guys can go get your kids. Go do what you got to do. Have an amazing lunch. Maybe we'll worship a little bit, but I just want to share a few things. If you want prayer for anything, just come up to the front. Right now, we're going to pray for you. If you feel like you've been under a heavy weighted limitation that you've had a hard time dealing with, I want to pray for you really quickly. Just come to the front. We're going to open this up. And I hope you have an amazing week this week. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.